Hello and welcome to a lecture about who you are. Who are you? Well, let's say you are this green circle. And under this green circle, we have your brain, which will be this square. And under that, we have a second square, that'll be your body. The brain communicates with the self, and the body communicates with the brain, and the brain communicates to the body. This is how movement happens. The self is the pilot, and the brain is the controls and the readout, and the body is the airplane or the bus, or it is the vessel. The reason why this is important is because we have a fish. The fish is in a pan, and the pan is over heat. You can see that, you know it's heat because I wrote the word heat over the squiggly lines. Is in water in the pan on the heat, because we're slowly boiling it alive. The fish is currently alive in this moment. The way that the heat is getting sensed by the outside sensory apparatus of the fish, and then that is communicating to the brain of the fish. That's like, whoa, it's getting hot, we should do something about this. And then the brain of the fish tells a story to the mind of the fish. That's like our existence is going to slowly dissipate because our environment is heating up and no one is doing anything about it. Unfortunately for the fish, the temperature is only very slowly going up. So over time, it'll gradually get hotter and hotter until it is eventually boiled alive. But the fish doesn't know this because it's getting used to it as it's getting gradually hotter. So even if the brain tells the self that, hey, we need to get out of here, we need to jump out, do the fish flop and fall out of the pan, the fish is like, no, we're fine. We don't need to do anything just yet because the water is still warm. We're safe here. This is an example of climate change. When you feel heat, let's say from the sun, if you feel heat, and the heat, your body is the one that feels the heat. Your body then sends signals to the brain that's like, hey, it's getting hot. And the brain then tells the self, it's getting hot, we need to go find shade, turn on the air conditioning, drink a cup of water. This is helpful because if the brain and the self are working together, then the self, and using the body as the vessel for the brain and the self, will then go to the house where they make the legislation. And they will be able to look further into the future and be like, hey, it's getting hot in here. We need to stop turning the heat up on our environment. Unlike the fish, who has no control, the self and the legislation comprise of multiple other selves, which are all aware of themselves. But they are separate. There is no hive mind in this government, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately. What are the advantages of a hive mind? Well, let's talk about the advantages of a hive mind. If you're a hive mind, you're made up of a bunch of different things, and they all communicate with each other, and they arrive at a consensus, and once they arrive at that consensus, they go and do that action. As opposed to legislation, where there's a bunch of selves in there, and they never reach a consensus. I had to redraw the legislation. And what are they going to do? Probably nothing in the short term. Hopefully something in the short term that will help us in the long term, because it is very difficult for people to think in the long term. Why? Because the body is talking to the brain, talking to the self about things that are happening right the hell now. Because the body is telling the brain to the self things that are happening right the hell now. The brain and the self are like, hey, what if we think about the future and conceptualize what our plans for life are? So you are not your body. And you are more than that. You are even more than just a collection of atoms that suddenly were like, whoa, we know we exist. And you are not even your brain. It is itself a thing. And then you have the self in the brain, because there are things in your brain that are not yourself, like instinctual reactions. That is not you. That is your brain doing a thing. You are wonderful and capable of so much. Unlike this fish who can jump out, you have the power of making your own decisions, and you have the ability to be aware of the fact that you are making decisions. What is that sound? That is the brain and the body and the mind working together. I feel like I've made my point here. We're going to stop this early. Have a good night.